Following the tragic events of September 11th, the United States of America went through a tectonic shift in politics and culture. The former was expected. Historically, after a breach in security, no matter the size, those who always wanted more security over individual rights get their way. Those who always wanted war, not peace, get their way. Those who have economic interests in both of these things have their eyes turned into cartoon dollar signs, and anyone who objects is labeled, at best, unpatriotic, and at worst, a traitor. That doesn't exactly play well with the voters. The shift in culture was also expected, but individual incidents are unpredictable. Before the war in Afghanistan, popular actor Richard Gere remarked that compassion is more powerful than vengeance. He was heavily booed. Popular comedian and talk show host Bill Maher got in hot water for suggesting that bombing other nations from a distance is cowardly and was forced to retreat from the airwaves, at least for a little while. And popular country music act The Dixie Chicks, in the lead-up to the Iraq War, were blackballed from country radio stations for telling an audience at a concert that they don't support the invasion of Iraq. The very psyche of the nation had changed. U.S. fetishization of the military is a long tradition, but now people were shocked and offended by anyone not supporting the president. People did not want to hear the star of an officer and a gentleman preaching tolerance. People did not want these celebrities, these Hollywood elites, urging caution about engaging in a forever war that would claim the lives of countless civilians. No. Whether they realized it or not, the people of the United States of America wanted something else from Hollywood. They wanted catharsis. Hollywood and the U.S. military and intelligence agencies have always had a cozy relationship. When a Hollywood producer approaches the Pentagon and asks for access to military assets to make their film, they have to submit their script to the entertainment liaison offices for vetting. Ultimately, the man with the final say is the Department of Defense's chief Hollywood liaison. U.S. government involvement also includes script rewrites on some of the biggest and most popular films, including James Bond, the Transformers franchise, and movies from the DC and Marvel cinematic universes. The CIA even helped make an episode of Top Chef. The influence is great, including script rewrites and approval on how the military and intelligence agencies can be portrayed. Hollywood studios could simply make their movies without authorization from the Department of Defense or Central Intelligence Agency. However, this would be to the detriment of the budget of the film. The government provides financial incentives for Hollywood to play ball, which means most major studio productions will take advantage of this in order to compete with other major studios. Some movies, such as Act of Valor and Top Gun, were so dependent on military cooperation that they simply couldn't have been made without submitting to this process. Others were not so lucky. A sequel to Top Gun was planned but was not made predominantly because the military rejected it. A Top Gun sequel, Top Gun Maverick, is finally being made due to support from the DoD. Movie budgets have skyrocketed in recent years, and reducing risk by bringing the DoD into the picture is more appealing than ever. The U.S. government has worked behind the scenes on over 800 major movies and more than 1,000 television titles. The DoD and CIA want Hollywood productions to portray the military and intelligence agencies as paternalistic and with the people's best interests at heart, especially during a time of war and crisis, which means that DoD and CIA access is contingent on supporting the war on terror. Of course, all of this state support and state censorship affects action movies more than any other genre. There aren't too many romantic comedies that require the use of a stealth bomber. Action movies have always been popular, but there was a time when comedies were blockbusters. Home Alone, Crocodile Dundee, and such. Some of the first blockbusters were horrors or thrillers, like The Exorcist or Jaws. Blockbusters outside of the action genre, like Titanic and Frozen, are rare. A glance at the highest-grossing films of all time shows most of them are action movies. This means that the DoD and CIA hold the keys to the kingdom for the most popular and most sought-after movies. Science fiction action movies like War of the Worlds required cooperation from the DoD. Superhero action movies like Captain America: The First Avenger received state assistance as well, as the military believed Steve Rogers a fine example of a U.S. veteran. Man of Steel features its own version of 9/11, a foreign threat that is brutally killed by a character who always looked a little like he was draped in the American flag. Superman himself is an alien, but the movie sidesteps this in the end.
I grew up in Kansas, General. About as American as it gets.
Man of Steel and 100 other action movies with 9/11 imagery provided a catharsis for the psyche of the US public, and the DoD is naturally happy to take advantage of this still present insecurity among the population. Here is an excerpt from the agreement between the DoD and the Man of Steel production obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request. DoD has approved military assistance as in the best interest of DoD, based on the 17th of August 2011 version of the script. The production company must obtain, in advance from DoD, concurrence for any subsequent changes being proposed to the military depictions made to either the picture or the sound portions of the production, before these changes are undertaken. But what about traditional action movies? The shoot-'em-ups, the movies starring the unstoppable, gun-toting merchant of death who is always portrayed as in the right no matter who gets blown up. Perhaps the best example of post-9/11 action movies comes from the Fallen series of films, featuring the fictional Secret Service agent Mike Banning. How does the Fallen series portray U.S. interests, both abroad and domestic? Olympus Has Fallen appeals to the psyche of the U.S. public by invoking 9/11, not explicitly but implicitly. The sight of important U.S. icons being destroyed and terrorism on U.S. soil. Images like these existed prior to 9/11, of course, but Olympus Has Fallen also has more overt references to 9/11 and the War on Terror, such as suicide bombers and justification for torture. Unlike actual torture as interrogation, which is consistently proven to be ineffective and resulting in misleading information, the torture in Olympus Has Fallen is 100% accurate and correct. It's portrayed as both morally right and demonstrably effective. What is the audience meant to feel when Mike Banning tortures someone for information? Catharsis. Endorsement. Olympus Has Fallen wears its nationalism on its sleeve. When a government official is taken away from the terrorists, she recites, and this is not a joke, the Pledge of Allegiance. We also get the standard amount of US flags, at first torn down by the terrorists, but then raised up when the terrorists are ultimately defeated. Olympus Has Fallen provides a catharsis for the US public, many of whom have begun to be tired of the forever war, by showing a final victory, something that can never happen in a war against a concept.
This is our time to lead by example with the dignity, integrity, and honor that built this country.
Director of Olympus Has Fallen, Antoine Fuqua, had help from the state in the form of a few men, one who was working for the DoD. Another such government consultant was Ricky Jones, who, according to Fuqua, worked for the government, but not Secret Service. Jones played a major role in shaping the film, not just making changes to the script, but also being on set constantly while the film was being made. Fuqua says these men helped him figure out what he could get away with and what he couldn't, and that there were some things like, okay, we've got to take this out, we can't show that. Thus, they had a crucial role in shaping the script and the resulting film. The next film in the series, London Has Fallen, takes the action to the United States' closest military ally, the United Kingdom. The antagonist and his terror cell are Middle Eastern, playing to post-9/11 xenophobia, and also, because it's set in the UK in 2016, playing to more localized xenophobia, Brexit style. In this scene, a man from London says there are barbarians at the gates. The film makes no distinction between Middle Eastern terrorists and Middle Eastern people when it spouts this cringy line.
Bingo. So why don't you boys pack up your shit and head back to Fuckheadistan or wherever it is you're from?
And in case that was too subtle, Banning also says this.
Yeah. The fact is, every single one of these guys is a terrorist asshole until proven otherwise.
Regardless of context, the message is clear. Mike Banning does not simply defeat the terrorists, he revels in their pain, as the film wants the audience to revel in it as well. He stabs them menacingly and repeatedly. The catharsis for the Western audience played up to an agonizing degree. Banning engages in torture even more in this film, further reinforcing discredited rendition techniques employed by the US military. Once again, the film series wears its nationalism on its sleeve. When the president is dragged away, he recites the presidential oath of office.
I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States.
Woof. When Banning confronts one of the terrorist leaders, he beats him while saying that the US will still be here and reign for 1,000 years. In other words, the movie references, perhaps by accident, historical ultranationalist rhetoric. 1,000-year reign? Where have we heard that before? This law enforcement officer executes someone for not complying even though he was apparently unarmed and posed no immediate threat. The movie frames this as necessary and good. And finally, the end of the film has the US military drone strike the bad guy, while someone off camera states that there are no civilians in the area, washing the hands of the global war on terror and massive civilian casualties. By most estimates, more civilians have been killed in the war on terror than soldiers or terrorists. Of the film, Stephen Lloyd Wilson of Pajiba wrote, "There's absolutely no hint of irony in the film. Just the blind paranoia that everyone in the world hates us for no reason whatsoever, and that they're completely infiltrated our entire society, while still somehow being outsiders who are objectively bad." This is a film that features the opening scene of an American drone strike, annihilating a wedding party of hundreds of civilians, and thus creating the vengeful antagonist, and then ends with Morgan Freeman giving a speech about how big our collective balls are, and how intervention is our moral right as history's good guys. It's small, hateful, and stupid, and perfectly encapsulates a Trump voter's worldview. Finally, that brings us to Angel Has Fallen, a movie marketed so badly that some people did not realize it was a sequel to Olympus Has Fallen and London Has Fallen. Angel Has Fallen features Mike Banning being framed by a private military company, which is the latest euphemism for mercenaries. PMC scandals hurt the public image of mercenaries several years back, and Angel Has Fallen uses this to draw a distinction between the Department of Defense and PMCs, even though both have been guilty of war crimes throughout the course of the War on Terror. In the film, the Vice President ignores this, and instead contrasts the US military with PMCs.
Hell, half these guys aren't even American. It's not the same fighting for money as when you fight for your flag.
Notice that the Vice President character still uses nationalistic language to denounce the crimes of PMCs. He says most are not even American, which is a nativist talking point, and also not true. Academy, previously known as Blackwater and referenced in the film, is an American company. When the US government tries to track the PMC, they claim they are not able to do this because they are somehow not in any federal databases. This cannot be true because most mercenaries who work for private military companies are ex-military or ex-law enforcement. Again, the movie washes the hands of the Department of Defense of any wrongdoing or involvement. The movie also tiptoes around telling the audience that the Russian hacking is just fake news. Banning is framed by the PMC. They planted evidence and made it look like Mike colluded with the Russians. In an interview, director of Angel Has Fallen Rick Roman Wow suggested that his films are love letters to the US military. I am a massive military supporter. So, if there was any doubt about the political leanings of this film series, those doubts should be gone by now. Let's not kid ourselves about what's happening and what we're seeing. This year, for the first time ever, Americans born after 9/11 will be able to enlist in the armed forces. Official military polling shows that fewer and fewer young Americans consider the military as a career or as a transitional step, the lowest numbers in decades. Beyond this polling, the actual recruitment figures from last year did not meet the quota set by the military. Revelations about war crimes thanks to whistleblowers and other factors have soured people on enlisting. Following 9/11, there was a surge in recruitment. The state activated the population's nationalism. But since then, the nation has been in an unending war, which means two things. First, there is never a sense of urgency. The war is status quo. Second, those interested in enlisting, simply to help pay for college, can no longer tell themselves that maybe their service will take place entirely during peacetime. If the war never ends, there is no peacetime. To combat this, the DoD has become even more aggressive with its recruiting, including as it relates to Hollywood action movies. Independence Day Resurgence had close ties to the DoD, and specifically to the United States Army. Resurgence actively helped the Army enlist young Americans through their collaborative website. Another example is Captain Marvel, which plays like an advertisement for the United States Air Force. That's just how action movies work now. The combination of Hollywood needing something to offset costs and the DoD needing a way to increase enlistment has made the two entities need each other now more than ever. Perhaps the only big Hollywood action movie series that doesn't feature any US military assets, references to 9/11, or references to post-9/11 politics is John Wick. That's not to say it's completely divorced from politics in general. Its fetishization of guns is pretty standard for the genre, but the film series encloses itself from foreign policy and world affairs by building its own isolated underworld and has no regard for who is in the White House. The film series is a bit of an outlier, though. 9/11 and the subsequent War on Terror are now intertwined with Hollywood action movies. So long as they're performing drone strikes over there, we'll be seeing drone strikes on the big screen. The producers of the Fallen movie franchise have confirmed that there are at least 3 more sequels coming, as well as various television series. And guess who's happy about that? The DoD has an invested interest in this happening. And considering there is no plan to end the global war, we're going to be stuck with this status quo for a very long time.
That's typical of the type of statements that the Soviets are making about the United States Navy and the Marine Corps, tools of imperialists, colonizers, Wall Street, so forth.